Let's talk about the evolution of cats. You notice here I have a cladogram that shows cats and three other mammals that are currently living: the platypus, the brown bear, the lion, and the house cat, which may or may not be on your lap at this point. This cladogram shows how they're all connected. So what that tells us is that the cat has an ancestor with lions, with bears, and with platypus. If you go back far enough, all four of these creatures would have evolved from one common ancestor millions and millions of years ago. Again, this animal is not alive today. The ancestor of these four animals did live. It probably looked nothing like any of them, but it did have some characteristics. In fact, if we go down to spot A, one characteristic that the ancient ancestor had was that it had hair. It also had mammary glands, which means it created milk for its young, and it laid eggs. So thinking about shared characteristics, we would expect, since the ancestor of all of these animals had hair, that all four modern animals would have hair. And sure enough, platypus and brown bear and lions and house cats do. They all have hair. In addition, we would expect that because the ancestor had mammary glands, that these animals would have mammary glands. And again, they do. All four of these creatures produce milk for their young. Lastly, we'd expect that all of these animals lay eggs. And the platypus does. But bears don't lay eggs, and lions don't lay eggs, and house cats most certainly don't lay eggs. So something must have happened. And sure enough, we go to point B. Point B shows that this ancestor, one offshoot of that ancestor, evolved the ability to have a placenta, which means that this animal had the ability to raise its young in its womb before it was born. And this is where we get a split. You'll notice the platypus is behind this split, which means the platypus still lays eggs. It didn't gain this characteristic. So platypus are very different from bears and lions and cats. They still lay eggs. Whereas all these other animals have placenta, or they give live birth. And let's go a little bit further along. Time continued. There was organisms that looked maybe a little like a bear, kind of like a lion, but it didn't look like a bear or a lion. And their ancestors evolved retractable claws, which means they could pull their claws back into their paws. One group of those animals evolved that ability. That trait became very common in that population. Another population didn't have that trait. Those two populations evolved separately. One of those populations evolved into brown bears that we know today. And we can go back and look at the traits. Sure enough, brown bears give live birth. They have placentas. They're covered in hair, and they make milk. They don't lay eggs because the placenta took the place of it. Now let's keep on going. Finally, we get down to this cat split. So right now we have an organism that could retract its claws. It gave live birth. It's covered in hair, made milk. And then we come to this one where an organism developed the ability to purr. It's a new characteristic. Part of that population evolved into house cats. Sure enough, house cats can purr. Whereas the organisms that branched off before this trait evolved do not have the ability to purr. And as much as you might want to pet a lion, don't. And also know that it will not purr because that characteristic is not shared. Only house cats have that ability to purr. And again, we can go backwards in time. The house cat can purr, it has retractable claws, it gives live birth, is covered in hair, and produces milk. So we can see from this diagram the rich connections between these four animals, and we can also see how characteristics that evolved a very long time ago have been passed down through time to house cats and lions and bears and platypus.